Thank you, Sophia. And I want to thank Jeff Renner and Alan Gerard and Brian Lamar for joining us today as part of this discussion about the vital role that the National Weather Service plays. I'm going to introduce them a little more in a few minutes. But obviously, we're here because we're very concerned about the administration's slashing of a workforce that is essential for weather forecasting that affects both hurricane and wildfire seasons. And today we're here because it is the beginning of hurricane season. NOAA, which at least 1,867 employees representing 16% of NOAA's workforce have been lost through the firing of probationary employees, early retirement, and the administration's effort to reduce that federal workforce. These staffing shortages are having a dangerous impact on the Weather Service, with more than 560 staff lost. That's a 33% reduction from typical staffing levels, leaving many weather forecast offices across the nation critically understaffed. We know in the Northwest, we care about fire season, and we have a new map that shows you the red areas are the areas that we believe will be most dangerous in the fire season. Actually, we have two different maps. So, okay. Thank you. Sorry. This is the June forecast, and Jeff will get this. This is the July forecast. So in the July forecast, you can see that the entire state of Washington is in the red, which means that our whole state will be in a high risk area for fire. And that is why we want to determine and have the best information we can about those weather conditions and how to fight those fires. We know one thing very dramatically, that if you have very high wind events, the challenges that we are facing in a fire season are almost, there's almost an inability to deal with them. So we want to know when those conditions are going to exist, because lives are at stake. Lives are at stake at fighting the fire. And if you're going to have these kind of unbelievable wind events, we need to be better prepared. So we're not the only people that have dealt with fire. Hawaii, the cost of the impact that we saw there, North and South Carolina, Texas, Florida, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, they're all facing above normal fire levels. And this week, we know that we're marking the beginning of hurricane season, with NOAA predicting a more active Atlantic hurricane season with impacts on the East Coast and Gulf states, and many of which are still recovering from the previous hurricane season. So the meteorologists here today are to talk about those staffing shortages, how the degrading weather report that you get every morning from the news and apps all depend on forecasting information. That forecasting information literally saves lives. And so we need the National Weather Service to be appropriately staffed and funded, and appropriate people to give us the life-saving information that we need. The National Weather Service life-saving forecast and warnings protect people, but they also protect property. And the development of these forecasts really take lots of scientists and lots of data. NOAA scientists collect about 6.3 billion data observations from satellites, buoys, planes, ships, balloons, and radar. And if you think about that, that's like a very comprehensive effort. Again, the three people we're going to hear from have dedicated their lives to using that information and informing the public. All that data analysis results in about 1.5 million in annual forecast and 50,000 warnings to help a community prepare for hurricanes, heat waves, wildfires, tornadoes, blizzards, and other extreme events. I first got active in this when we had a horrific 100-year flood event out on our coast that lost lives, and previous administrators and weather service officials thought that we didn't need a Doppler for our coast. They didn't understand that without that data, Seattle couldn't really predict because of the blocking of our Olympic range, that basically we were not giving people on the Pacific coast in our state the accurate weather information. And several people died, huge loss of property. And that was when people said, oh, you need your own Doppler system. And that's what we're saying today, that do not take the staff away, do not take the people that are giving us the analysis of this data and information, do not take them off their job, because they are going to help all of us be a network and prepare for hurricane season and later fire season. Last year, there were 27 weather disaster events that cost taxpayers at least $1 billion. And that totaled a total of $183 billion, and it resulted in 568 deaths. So we're trying to prevent those damages, and we're trying to prevent, obviously, the devastating impact to life by being prepared, by getting people where they need to be. From day one, the Trump administration has been undermining NOAA and the National Weather Service. We have said to the Commerce Secretary that these cuts in services are undermining our ability to deliver accurate information to the public. And every former director of the National Weather Service, representing both Republican and Democrat administrations, wrote a letter saying, quote, "The worst nightmare is that weather forecast offices will be so understaffed that there will be a needless loss of life," end quote. That is coming from former National Weather Service representatives. And we've already seen these impacts from the administration failing to heed these warnings. For at least a half a century, the National Weather Service has provided forecasts for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week until now. At least 8 weather forecasting offices no longer have a meteorologist to cover overnight shifts. They are planning on eliminating the NOAA buoy program. You can't map a hurricane if you don't have the buoy information. And this includes places that these loss of office places where we don't have the overnight forecasters, places in central Washington, places in Oregon. And losing those overnight forecasters means that we're at risk. Out of town skeleton forecast crews are now assigned to cover these offices. And I'm concerned that they won't be able to deliver the forecast and warnings that communities need, which are important to have. Things like what schools need to be evacuated, what roads might flood, what are the key issues the community needs to act on to give law enforcement and others the tools that they need to be helpful. On top of that, 30 of the 122 weather forecast offices don't currently have a meteorologist in charge. They're the most experienced weather expert. And some of those vacancies are in major metropolitan areas, such as New York, Cleveland, Houston, and hurricane-prone Tampa. The Secretary's assertion this morning that the National Weather Hurricane Center is fully staffed is incorrect. The National Hurricane Center has at least 5 vacancies going into hurricane season. These provisions provide marine forecast, weather warnings for whole of the Atlantic Basin and the Eastern Pacific, and they track intensity and size of storms and maintain critical software. Despite what the Secretary said this morning, NOAA has been transparent that they can't keep up. They have said that they can't keep the lights on in a number of forecast offices. The Department of Commerce needs to be clear to the American people that these staffing shortages will impact our ability to compute that science, get those wildfire crews and emergency response where they need to go. Every summer, NOAA deploys meteorologists to the fire lines to help track wind, rain, smoke, and other critical information needed to fight fires. Just last year, I was on one of those lines in central Washington and met with the meteorologist, and it's so critical in those parts of our state that you have that meteorologist on the ground in that particular fire, because they have to advise all the firefighters and the response and what has to happen. They are the one advising. And if you think you're going to substitute somebody that's going to look, somebody that's going to be somewhere else, I don't know where, some other part of the state or some other state, and you think you're going to give them accurate weather information, it doesn't work that way. It just doesn't. Just yesterday, King 5 reported that Matthew Deere, Washington State wildfire meteorologist, said that he is scared because we may have lost many on the ground NOAA meteorologists that are needed for the fire line. That means we may not have enough information we need to effectively fight wildfires. And when we have wildfires and they build a fire line that saves the whole community, they need to know where they are supposed to go. We don't have unlimited resources when we are fighting fires, particularly when we have very strong wind, which, believe it or not, is the life-saving thing that the meteorologist does. He calls the shots. And if the winds are too high, he says we're not going out. And we had an incident in our state where we didn't have a local meteorologist and people went out and it was the wrong conditions and we lost lives. So we don't want to repeat this. We don't want to go through what we've already learned in our state. We are short more than 90 staff whose job it is to keep the Doppler radar and automated air weather sensors operating across the nation. Weather data from the Doppler and airport system is the backbone of the forecast information. It is what pilots and air traffic controllers use to manage air traffic and minimize flight delays. So we need to have these programs funded. We know that right now that critical weather could be coming at us. They did come back and fill a few of the jobs, but NOAA is still critically understaffed. We need to have NOAA fully staffed at a time when the weather is going to cost us lives and billions of dollars if we don't call the right shots. This week, the administration announced approval for the Weather Service to hire less than a quarter of the total staff that they lost in this administration. A quarter of the staff are not going to do the job when, let's just say, both hurricane and fire risks are increasing. We were barely getting by. So their approach in response to this has been a flimsy Band-Aid over a very massive cut. With hurricane and wildfires season bearing down, the administration should act now to lift this hiring freeze and ensure that these communities, these pilots, these firefighters, emergency responders, and these meteorologists have the weather information they need to help us save lives. And now I'd like to turn it over to our panelists. First, we'll start with Brian Lamar, who's a meteorologist in charge in Tampa Bay area, to speak to the upcoming hurricane season and the danger it proposes to the southeast and beyond, and the importance of having a meteorologist in charge. Those are those 30 that we're missing right now, and we need more. And overall, what these staffing shortages represent. Brian, thank you for joining us.
All right, thank you, Senator. Thank you for your support and for forming this important panel, today. I've had over 30 years in the National Weather Service. My career started back in 1992. And in that year, a lot of people in Florida remember Hurricane Andrew, right? That was a very powerful storm. And more than half of my career, I was the meteorologist in charge at the National Weather Service here in Tampa, Florida. And we cover pretty much all of the West Coast and Southwest coast of Florida. It's a very active state when it comes to hurricane season. And as you mentioned, hurricane season started this week. So we're already a handful of days into the 2025 hurricane season, but the National Weather Service and NOAA are dealing with their own storm right now in the form of short staffing and budget cuts. And it's having impacts on the number of staffing that are available to actually meet the 24/7 mission. Not every office across the country is short staffed, but there are, as you said, there are 8 that are below a certain number of employees that work at that particular office. And that means that they can't work 24/7 operations. That's never before happened in my career, but there are some offices that are having sufficient staffing. But again, whenever you look at an office that is short staffed, that means that a piece of that larger puzzle is taken away, right? And so that means that some outreach might not be able to occur, some training might not be able to occur, some briefings to officials might not be able to occur. But as a longtime employee in the National Weather Service, we're very mission focused, very dedicated, and we do what is needed to be done to get the mission completed. So again, a lot of gaps across the agency as we go into this hurricane season. And you mentioned the meteorologist in charge position because there's about 30 that are vacant right now, including my former position at the NWS office in Tampa. And that position, if you think of a chief meteorologist, that is the chief meteorologist or the office director at each of the 122 weather forecast offices across the country. And that person leads the office. That person is the main point of contact when it comes to briefing elected officials, emergency management directors, state governors, city mayors, parish officials. These are the individuals that are leading that office and also leading change. They are the individual that's going to be implementing any new change that is needed for hurricane season, blizzards, wildfires, inland flooding. And I say inland flooding because I want to kind of wrap on that one is because a lot of people, when they think of the hurricane season, they think of coastal counties. And as we saw last year with Hurricane Helene that hit not far from where I'm sitting today in Tampa, Florida, that storm tracked much farther inland, as many do, and did significant devastating impacts, some of which are people are still recovering as we speak today in parts of Western North Carolina and Eastern Tennessee. And that was significant inland flooding. So again, we think of the hurricane season, it's not only about the coastline. And Senator, you may be muted.
Thank you so much. We're now going to turn to Alan Gerard, a 35-year meteorologist with the National Weather Service and with the National Severe Storms Laboratory in Norman, Oklahoma, to talk about severe storms and why the Office of Atmospheric Research is a critical aspect to weather forecasting. Thank you so much, Alan.
Thank you for having me, Senator. And I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with this distinguished panel because, as you said, I started with the National Weather Service in 1990. As with Brian, I was a meteorologist in charge for a number of years. While he was in Tampa, I was in Jackson, Mississippi until 2015. And I worked a number of serious weather events during my time, including Hurricane Katrina, the super outbreak of 2011, the super tornado outbreak. And those events really reinforced to me, as you said, Senator, that all of this is a matter of life and death. And it's very important to me that that NOAA and the Weather Service be able to meet its mission. And as Brian alluded to, for the first time in 35 years, I have real concerns due to the staffing situation and the very fact that some offices aren't able to operate 24/7, and that the administration has authorized these hires during a hiring freeze tells you that there's recognition that there's serious shortages. But I want to finish by taking a few minutes to talk about the last role I had at NOAA, which was as a branch director at the National Severe Storms Laboratory, which is part of the Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research. And I moved into that position because I'd had an opportunity over the years to work with OAR labs on developing doing research and developing new products and services to help Weather Service meteorologists and meteorologists in general to be able to provide better information. And essentially, the current president's budget would eliminate the entire line office of OAR and all of that research infrastructure that has been developed over the decades. The National Severe Storms Lab, the Hurricane Research Division in Miami, the Global Systems Lab in Boulder, which does a lot of fire weather and wildfire research. All of those labs and their associated cooperative institutes that are at the universities in those communities would all be eliminated under the current budget. And that just would really be disastrous from a perspective of being able to do things like advance tornado warnings with the Warn on Forecast system that my laboratory was developing, to develop new tools for the incident meteorologists, which is in progress right now. And one of the things that I had an opportunity to be very active with when I was at the Severe Storms Lab before I retired was NOAA's Hazardous Weather Test Bed, which is where we would bring in broadcast meteorologists like Jeff and emergency managers and the people that actually use these new tools and work together to co-develop research and tools that would help improve all of the services that keep people safe. And all of that is in tremendous danger right now, given the proposal to eliminate OAR.
Thank you. Thank you for that. It's really the research. You know, when we worked on the Doppler thing out on the coast of Washington, I said, well, we're good now, right? We have this Doppler. And there were a bunch of people there and they said, no, Senator, we're not good yet. We need everything. I said, well, what do you mean? They said, well, every particle in the storm is an algorithm and you could run supercomputing time and it would give you a better prediction of that supercomputing analysis and tell you what the real impacts of the storm are. I said, well, why aren't we doing that? And again, they referred to the NOAA budget, which I do think is one of the reasons you hear a lot about the European forecast model now, which is very frustrating. They'll, here's what we think. And then, but the European model says X. That is because the Europeans spend more time on the supercomputing analysis of the weather information. So I can't think of anything that I would rather spend more supercomputing time on as it relates to saving American lives than making sure that we have accurate weather forecasting information. So there is more to do on research. There is, and it could be very helpful and we should invest in it. It would save the American people lives and it would save money. Jeff Renner, so proud of you, Jeff, for your years of Northwest coverage. You're obviously was at King 5 in Seattle, so the guy who had to take all this data that Brian and Alan were giving and reporting on and turn it into real analysis for the people of our state. And he's going to talk about the critical role that forecasters play in helping us predict these extreme weather events and the importance that Northwest NWS data forecasting to the entire industry and what that means. So Jeff, welcome and thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator, and thank you also for your championing of the coastal radar. That provided protection and saved lives and properties really from the day it was turned on. As I'm essentially hitting cleanup, I'd like to recognize both Brian and Alan for their years of service. And I find it frankly shameful that we even have to have this sort of discussion. More people such as you and I now utilize weather apps such as I have on my telephone. Yet there is a lack of fundamental appreciation that most of those forecasts, if not all of them, stem from National Weather Service forecasts. There are also the important sources of data, information operated and maintained, by the National Weather Service and also by NOAA. Examples would include some of those you've already heard, such as, pardon me, I've got a throat problem here, include surface and high altitude weather observations over both land and sea.
We'll give you a break for a second. Yeah,
thank you.
Take a sip of Northwest coffee or water.
Some peppermint tea.
Yeah.
From my regional perspective, as a longtime broadcast meteorologist here in the Pacific Northwest, some 38, 39 years, I would mention 4 key elements that are dependent upon the National Weather Service that impact public safety. Atmospheric rivers. Could I have a break for a minute, please?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Before you resume, I will just tell you that, I think we're making the terminology atmospheric rivers popular here in DC. I think people didn't really understand it. And I think they thought, oh, this is just some new thing and you're trying to get, but no, we're like, no. Atmospheric rivers are really affecting us in the Northwest. And because of our terrain and not deeply rooted trees and the amount of damage that can happen from a very concentrated, again, that's what the data showed us, right? Yeah. That the atmospheric river was like a severe amount of moisture at a critical point. I think even when we had the Oso blowout, I think somebody said we had 4 inches that day.
That was very true. And let me try to jump back in,
Yes,
Senator.
please.
We should explain that atmospheric rivers essentially draw up huge volumes of water from the tropics to the Pacific Northwest and to California as well. And that the end result is landslides, erosion, flooding, and the loss of very important and very critical infrastructures such as bridges and roads that can prevent interstate and intrastate commerce for long, very long periods. I think another one that, based on my experience, is that of windstorms. We do experience hurricane force winds here in the Pacific Northwest. I think we could look back to the bomb cyclone just last November. I think it was November 18th and 19th. And those produced not only hurricane force winds, took several lives, and also eliminated power to some 600,000 customers. It wasn't just for a matter of a couple of days, it was a matter of a week, even more than a week. I know that was my personal experience. Another element would be fires, and you mentioned that, Senator. We are entering into fire weather season, and as more developments move into what we call the urban wildland fire interface, we're seeing that that's a key factor. Fire seasons, fire weather seasons are lengthening, and the meteorologists that respond to that have very specific training and very specific experience that can't be easily duplicated, particularly from those outside the area. Not only do they have the business of alerting local communities to the potential for danger, but also providing guidance for the response crews, the very courageous men and women who respond to these, who seek to both suppress and also eliminate or extinguish those fires. The last one is based on my experience, and it might be not totally apparent, but that is within broadcasting. The weather segment of a television news broadcast is probably the first or second most watched element of a newscast. As TV and radio ownership groups begin to expand often beyond the local areas, we're seeing a move towards some stations that are seeking to outsource the production and even the presentation of those weather elements. That means a loss of local knowledge, and as Brian and Alan have both stated so very well, that's critical in doing a good job of giving information, timely information, to local viewers and consumers of weather information. That makes the presence, I believe, of a fully staffed National Weather Service forecast office in any location absolutely critical, not just during daylight hours, but throughout 24-hour cycle. As I think we'd say on television, that's a wrap for my particular remarks, but I'm happy to answer any questions that might exist.
Great. Sophia, let's go to questions.
Awesome. Thank you all for that great discussion. We're going to now transition to our Q&A. We'll ask that members of the press identify their name and their outlet in the chat function, and then we'll just go through one by one, and I'll unmute people, and then you'll be free to ask your question to the senator or any of our panelists. Looking through here. Our first question is going to come from Isabella Breda at the Seattle Times.
Organizing this. I guess I was wondering if you have a clear idea of how these cuts will affect our Northwest incident management teams.
Well, the Central Washington issue is one that's glaring because with fire season coming up in that map is, again, part of a forecast that comes out and again, it's based on the weather and how much moisture or lack thereof and how dry things are going to be. And so they're definitely putting the whole state in an epicenter. I think, Jeff, I know you're retired, but you probably have already listened to forecasting in our state over the last several months. And we know that we don't have the snowpack that we thought that we were going to have. And so that consequence of that, it means we're at a higher risk. So if you don't have a person in central part of the state, this is where we've had our most combustive big fires. And this is where we've had loss of life. And if you don't have that, so I don't know if somebody just thinks, oh, well, these are duplicates and they can cover it from Seattle. I just gave you an example of where you couldn't. Seattle, basically they had a meteorologist, somebody in Seattle, and they looked at the weather they looked at the weather in Seattle and they said, oh, it's okay to go fight that fire in Central Washington that day. It was not. If they would have had the weather information on the ground in central Washington, big swath of our state, big landmass, big population center, they would have known it was too dangerous to send people out to fight that fire, and we lost lives because they shouldn't, in those volatile of fire conditions, should not have been there. And only a meteorologist on the ground can tell you that. It doesn't matter what's happening in Seattle. We're all the way over on the other side of the pass. Jeff?
Yeah. If I could just add to that, we often have what we call gap winds. And unless you have that kind of local knowledge, such as the fire weather specialists have, you don't know that you're going to get a very thin but very accelerated band of winds that can really exacerbate the quick spread of fires and endanger people, such as Senator mentioned. She mentioned the ones in central Washington. We also had a loss of several firefighters a few years back in Twisp. Again, that could have been prevented if you had more weather coverage in terms of people familiar with fire weather and the sort of conditions that can very rapidly accelerate the spread and the intensity of these fires.
Perfect. Next, we're going to go ahead and go to Zach Coleman of Politico.
Hi, thank you for doing this. Just a question about the cuts right now. I mean, right in this moment, we have wildfire smoke coursing throughout the U.S., and I want to know, are any capabilities to track that smoke or emerging wildfires or even air quality monitoring data, is any of that affected by the staffing shortages and cuts that the Trump administration has proposed and executed?
You're talking about, does anything, well, the elimination of the meteorologist from like a central Washington place gives you less data. So you don't know where a fire is going to start or when it's going to start. And we just know this, that the conditions have created a more fire prone situation. So you have to be a more fire ready nation. And so if you take the infrastructure away, whether that's people or forecast materials, then you're not going to be prepared. I think these guys will tell you that the big effort that helps you the most is by being able to predict in advance what the damage might be. That way you can get resources to that community in ahead of time. So for example, if you think that Central Washington is going to be the most fire prone and we could have a very big event, then you're calling all states, you're calling all resources, and you're going to get resources placed in that community, just like you would with a hurricane coming. You're going to get the resources there on the ground. And that's what we're starting to see now. As you know, we're seeing this line across Canada. You know, is very worrisome because, you know, we're talking about areas that could be, they just don't have a lot of resources. They don't have resources to fight the fire. So, I think we had 100,000 acres blow up on one afternoon in the Colton complex fire. So if you had resources in these rural communities, you might be able to combat that better. So Alan, I don't know if you had any.
I was just going to add I'm sorry, Senator.
No,
I was just going to add that he asked about new tools and the high resolution model, the HER smoke model, is the model that we use primarily to forecast how that smoke, like from central Canada, is coming down, and that was developed by the Global Systems Lab, which is also developing a lot of new tools for wildfire monitoring and IMET support, and that's a part of OAR. So that would be something that would be eliminated with the proposed budget, and other activities like at the National Severe Storms Lab that are being done with Warren on Forecast to help better forecast wildfire conditions, smoke, all that research, all that cutting edge stuff that would help things would be in danger with the elimination of OAR.
Yeah. We will get you numbers on. I think there's something like 7,400 Forest Service people that have also been cut, but we'll get you that combination of how the lack of information and the lack of staff really puts you at risk. But generally, it's just about knowing in advance so you can get the resources there and alert local law enforcement. Did you want to add something, Brian?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. And kind of branch off on the fire topic too. The incident meteorologist, or IMET, that Alan and Jeff referred to, a lot of the majority of the IMETs across the National Weather Service are positioned at weather forecast offices. And so they are part of the normal staff number. They're part of the normal operations. And so when you start looking at offices that are short-staffed and then severely short-staffed, you're seeing how that can have a domino effect moving forward into the future. So even though the National Weather Service has seen short staffing throughout my whole career, we're just in a different climate right now where there are many offices that are now seeing numbers that they've never seen before. And that will impact the number of IMET missions that could happen. That will impact that because the office is not able to operate 24/7 in a handful of locations across the West.
Thank you.
Wonderful. We're going to go ahead and go to Joshua McNichols from KUOW Seattle.
Thank you. Obviously, the greatest risk is to human life, but as an economics reporter, I'm asking, what are the main economic impacts on Washington state, and will changes in weather service reliability affect where people can safely live across the nation and across the state of Washington? Thank you.
Well, I don't know if anybody wants to jump in there first, but definitely there's a lot of economics to this. You have the loss of timber land, I think, in that Carlton complex, or the fire next to the Carlton complex. I think the Colville tribe lost $2 billion worth of timber in one afternoon. So if you have weather forecasting information that says you need to be more aggressive about fire breaks, better policies, I think Susan Collins and I had a CBO report that gave the numbers of how much these changes in weather and climate are costing the American taxpayer. And it's in the trillions of dollars now. We did a report several years ago. It was in the billions. Now it's in the trillions. And the point is, you would have better preparatory measures to try to stop the impact. So those economic impacts also are just like the loss of an economy. When you have either, like in Twisp, those fires, and then you lose access to an entire what I would call recreational mountain community, throughout the region, and because again, you didn't have the resources or the prediction to stabilize them. So we know these are going to increase, and we know we're going to have great economic loss. And so the question is, what can you do on the preparedness and prevention side that are smarter investments? Brian, I don't know the hurricane issues as well, so you'll have to jump in.
It is, but also it makes me think of, the National Weather Service budget as a whole. And, for every citizen in the United States, the funding for the National Weather Service is about $4 per person per year. So it's a very small agency in the federal government. However, the mission is enormous in terms of, protecting life and property. And like you said earlier, Senator, the billion-dollar disasters, there were between 25 and 30 last year, that each of which produced $1 billion or more in economic impacts. A lot of people think it's collective. It's actually each of those events have produced over $1 billion in damage. Think of Hurricane Helene, think of Hurricane Milton, the wildfires, blizzards, and tornado outbreaks. And the return on investment of that $4 a year per person is multiple times on the return on investment. So again, it's a drop in the bucket when you're looking at the NWS budget, but when you look at the critical mission for protection of life and property, enhancing the economy, it's significant.
Quick follow-up, if I could.
Yes.
So, deciding whether or not to flee a storm or a fire is a short-term decision, but decisions about where people live and make their homes is a long-term decision that in some ways seems less affected by weather service reliability. But I'm wondering if there are changes in where people can safely live that are affected by the degradation of this information.
Well, the reason why we need the good information is because it is going to inform us of those risks and the complexity of those risks. And if the risk is increasing, which it is, then we have to come up with better strategies. So was mentioned earlier by Jeff, the wildland urban interface, the WUI. So we're basically saying don't build in the wildland urban interface because you're literally going to be putting houses close to trees that may be more volatile under these weather conditions. And so you're really trying to come up with better policies, but it's all based on that information and the science that NOAA provides. And they send up balloons to measure within regions how much moisture is in the air. That tells them how volatile is the condition. And then Jeff mentioned the winds, that you could have an upswing in velocity, and all of a sudden you have almost like a volcanic action in a national forest. And so what we're trying to do is get the information to be consistent so that we can make better decisions. But these communities that live with these challenges every day are making different decisions. They are making different land use decisions. We are now seeing the same plaguing of insurance coverage that Florida faces on hurricane and just damage that there are places of Florida that now people probably can't get insurance. We are hearing from insurers in Washington State. There are now places in Washington State because of fire that they won't provide insurance themselves from the private sector. There is a small state program that provides insurance for those individuals who can't get coverage any other way, but it's a very small amount. So it's, again, all the science and data helps us illuminate how much this is growing and the challenge we face and what we should do about it. But you got to have that science and data. You have to have it.
If I
Wonderful.
can just expand on that just briefly, what I would say is that we see on a local basis that there's a lot of development in the Seattle metro area, just to name one area in the Puget Sound region, that's reaching farther and farther toward the Cascades. North Bend is an example, Enumclaw is another, some of the areas along the US 2 corridor, and people are even locating over Snoqualmie Pass and Cle Elum, for example. And lacking that ability to anticipate fire danger and to respond to it is certainly going to probably impact some of those decisions, as well as mountain weather forecasting. We see the passes closed down for days. Sometimes we've had all the east-west thoroughfares shut down, and that's going to impact economic activity as well.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jeff. I see 3 more questions flagged in the chat. If you have not flagged that you have the question for either the senator or the panelists, please flag now. Next, we're going to go over to Greg Allen at NPR Miami. Greg, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Sorry, yeah, here. This is for Senator Cantwell. A couple of questions, Senator. One is, if you're seeing a recognition of the problems, not just with the National Weather Service, but also with FEMA, among your Senate colleagues in these hurricane-prone states like Florida, where I'm from, Louisiana, Texas, and also in the fire-prone states out west where you have Republican senators. Are they feeling like you are, that something has to be done to get the attention of the Trump administration to restore those cuts and to actually protect people? And the other kind of tied to that, I'm thinking, it's 20 years now since Katrina, when we saw, you recall, Brownie doing a heck of a job. I mean, a lot of us are starting to wonder if we could see something like that this year, where you just have an administration that is failing to understand the depth of the problems and the need for preparedness and response to one of these disasters.
Well, Senator Moran on the Commerce Committee, which I serve, has raised these issues, I know for sure. And we hope our colleagues, one of the reasons why we're doing this today is because we want people to understand that these budget cuts and these staffing shortages do impact our ability to respond to these disasters. And with the opening of hurricane season right now upon us, now is not the time to make people less prepared, but to give those officials. So I would assume that our Florida colleagues and our Southern Coast colleagues would really want to have the best preparation possible, and that they would, be calling in. But I don't, there's a lot going on, so I'm not sure everybody understands the the complexity of what happens when you don't have this incident command person or you don't have the data and information. It's, I'm not sure. I think we're connecting the dots today because you have to have the data and you have to have the people to interpret the data on the spot where they are. It's, it doesn't do you any good to have somebody in a desk in Bethesda say, oh, it looks like it's going to be a high weather event in Florida. No. These are minutes save lives. And it's getting that accurate information so that someone can plan an entire response before the incident actually takes place. And if you know the danger, I don't know if you remember, we had this very unfortunate, very sad, very, oh my gosh, just tragic accident in, off of Florida of a cargo ship from the state of Washington. I mean, I think it was Matson.
Oh,
No,
no.
it was,
It was
anyway,
Salt Chuck. It was
Salt Chuck.
yeah,
Thank you.
it was their
So the whole
law
crew,
firm.
the whole crew, they didn't know what they were going into. And if they had had the best communication, they would have known that they were headed into a disastrous situation. The weather information finally got to them, but by the time it got to them, they were out of range of being able to receive the communication. And the whole ship went down, and the loss of those lives and their loved ones, I'm sure, still suffer to this day over the fact that we didn't have a system that better warned them that you shouldn't be underway in those conditions. And the thing is that science has advanced so much that you really can do better forecasting. You really can give people this kind of information in advance, and you really can make decisions and plan. And you can certainly also take the data and make long-term decisions that, like we're gonna move more property out of certain areas of danger, and we're gonna do this, and it's the lifeblood of emergency response is this NOAA data.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Next, we're going to go ahead and go to Evan Bush of NBC News.
Hi, thanks so much for doing this, Senator. The National Weather Service and NOAA a few weeks ago put out a reassignment opportunity, and I was wondering if you knew whether meteorologists had moved to new offices permanently because of that reassignment opportunity, and whether that was relieving some of the pressure.
No, the temporary people aren't relieved. I mean, I know that they said they were going to try to bring 150 people back, but the temporary thing, you need the experts, and it's a very specific skill, and the data is very specific, and you need people to then interpret it. I mean, just look at the three people that are on this call and their ability to talk about their end of they are all different ends of this business. And yet all of that together is what then gives us the ability to warn the public and make policy decisions that help us in the future. It's a system based on science, and now it's like somebody doesn't understand the science and they just want to shortcut it because they think, oh well, that looks like a lot of people, let's cut the budget. And it's very foolish because you're basically preventing a lot of damage by doing better planning. But you gotta have the data. So those temporary people don't really help you. You need that local knowledge in the incident command.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Evan. We have two more questions. We're going to try to get out of here in the next couple minutes, but we're going to go to Dina Pulver at USA Today next.
She might be muted.
Can you hear me?
Yep,
Yes.
Dina, we got you.
Oh, okay. I wondered if Brian could comment on the hurricane forecasting this summer. There seems to be a lot of concern that the staffing shortages at local weather forecast offices are going to impact the accuracy of the forecasts if a hurricane is about to make landfall somewhere along the U.S. coast? And how widespread is that concern among other meteorologists in the private and public sectors?
No, it's a great question, Dina, and I'm glad you brought it up. And yeah, like I mentioned earlier, the short staffing is prevalent across much of the country. Some offices are more short staffed than others. Say, for example, the Tampa office where I used to be in charge, that office is short 6 positions, including my previous position as meteorologist in charge. And only 2 of those 6 positions are considered operational. So the office is still able to, go out, do outreach, do training, help the community understand what the impacts are going to be. But not every office is fortunate to be staffed like that office. So I know Miami and Key West have some staffing shortages. I believe I heard it was anywhere from like 30 to 40%. And so those 2 offices are kind of grouping together to provide mutual aid for one another. And that's not uncommon, but again, the number of offices that are having to do mutual aid is not common. And so that's one way to look at it. And as far as any other private sector, I think a lot more people are starting, their eyes are opening, right? So we had significant winter storm events in March. We had significant tornado outbreaks in April, May, and even yesterday. And we're starting to see now, okay, well, hurricane season is here, and that tends to get a lot more attention. So a lot more people are starting to hear about these challenges in the National Weather Service and NOAA. And so I think thankfully today, with the senator bringing this together, that hopefully we'll see some more changes coming in the near future.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would just add that those buoys, the fact that they're cutting those buoys are basically weather gathering information in the open waters, and they're cutting that program, so they're eliminating it, I think. So that affects your ability to gather hurricane data.
Thanks, Sina. We'll go ahead to our last question. This will be from Chelsea Harvey at Politico's E&E.
Hi, all. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Thanks so much. Senator Cantwell, you mentioned earlier that there are at least 5 vacancies at the National Hurricane Center, despite NOAA officials' earlier claims that the NHC is fully staffed. I was wondering if you have any information on the specifics of those open positions and how they might affect hurricane forecasting capabilities this season.
Yeah, they represent meteorologists and technicians that create marine forecasts and warnings for the Atlantic Basin and the Eastern Pacific. That means they track the intensity of storms, the critical software that is needed to send them warnings to people. These are the vacancies.
Gotcha. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Senator, if you have any closing thoughts, we'll go ahead and round out our program.
I just want to thank the panelists for participating in this and sounding the alarm about why this is so important. I wish we were talking about how to be a better weather-ready nation. I wish we were brainstorming with a bunch of technology people about what else we could be doing to lower the impact and the cost of what we know is more challenging weather events. But instead, here we are fighting for just essential level of service. But nonetheless, I so appreciate it. Hopefully we'll get to that other conversation sometime soon. And thank you all for participating. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for providing
Thank
this.
you so much. Yes. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.